A German Shepherd puppy lay forgotten on a remote trail until a U.S. Marine walked past at dusk. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the desolate, forgotten trail. The air was cool, a slight breeze rustling the leaves as the day made way for the night. The quiet hum of the forest was broken only by the occasional distant bird call. On this remote path, so far from civilization, a small German Shepherd puppy lay curled up, alone and struggling for breath. The puppy, its fur matted from dirt and its small frame shivering from the cold, had been abandoned here, forgotten by whoever had left it to fend for itself. The puppy's once bright eyes were dull, its body weak from hunger and exposure. It whimpered softly, barely able to move as it tried to find comfort in the harsh, unfamiliar wilderness. With every shallow breath, it seemed as if the tiny creature was slipping further away from life. The hours dragged on, and the puppy, alone and helpless, could do nothing but wait. It had been a while since it had seen any sign of human presence, and hope was starting to fade. But just as the last light of day began to disappear into the shadows, something changed. A sound broke the silence, a sound of boots crunching against the dirt, the steady rhythm of someone approaching. As the figure came into view, the puppy's ears perked up, its faint eyes struggling to focus. A man appeared, walking down the trail. He was tall, with the strong, purposeful stride of someone used to challenges. His military jacket swayed slightly with his movements, and his face, though weathered by time, carried the calm, determined expression of a Marine. His name was Sergeant Jack Thompson, and he had been out on a routine patrol in the woods, taking the trail as a shortcut back to base. As he walked past the spot where the puppy lay, something made him stop. He turned his head, his trained eyes catching a glimpse of the small, pitiful creature barely visible among the leaves. His heart sank as he knelt down beside the puppy. The Marine gently scooped the trembling animal into his arms, feeling its frail body, the tiny heartbeat racing beneath its fur. It was clear to him that the puppy had been abandoned, left to die alone in this unforgiving wilderness. Without a second thought, Jack pulled the puppy closer to his chest, his protective instincts kicking in. His training had taught him to never leave anyone behind, and he wasn't about to let this helpless animal suffer any longer. The Marine's mind raced as he searched for any signs of life in the puppy. He could feel its shallow breathing, its warmth still there, but the weakness was undeniable. Jack knew he had to act fast. He stood up with the puppy securely in his arms, his eyes scanning the area for any shelter or sign of help. But the trail was deserted, and the nearest base was miles away. With the last light of the day fading, Jack quickened his pace, his focus entirely on the little life in his arms. The journey back would not be easy, but he wasn't about to let the puppy down. It was a promise he made to himself that no matter the cost, he would get it the help it desperately needed. As he moved through the woods, the darkness creeping in around him, Jack couldn't help but wonder about the puppy's fate. Who had left it there? And why? The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. He would save this puppy, no matter what it took. The evening air grew colder as the light from the fading sun cast long shadows across the trail. Jack Thompson quickened his pace, his boots crunching against the dry leaves, his breath coming in short bursts as he cradled the tiny puppy in his arms. He could feel the weight of the responsibility growing heavier with each step. The puppy's small body was trembling, its tiny heart beating erratically against Jack's chest. The more he thought about the puppy's condition, the more anxious he became. It was clear that time was running out. Every minute mattered. Jack had seen too many lives lost in his career, and he was determined not to let this one slip away. His thoughts raced as he moved forward through the dense forest. The trail was narrow, barely wide enough for him to navigate with the puppy in his arms. The darkness of the approaching night made the path even harder to see, and every step felt like a fight against the elements. He could hear the soft rustle of the trees in the wind and the distant call of an owl, but everything else was silent, almost as if the forest was holding its breath. The puppy was growing weaker in his arms, its breathing shallow and irregular. Jack's heart sank with every labored gasp the little creature took. He refused to let it die alone out here in the cold. His training as a Marine had taught him never to leave anyone behind, and that promise extended to this helpless animal. He pressed on, refusing to give up. He thought back to the days he had spent in the field, in places far more dangerous than this, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling of holding this fragile life in his hands. The puppy had been abandoned, left to die on a trail that was far from any help. As Jack walked, his mind drifted to the fact that the puppy had somehow made it this far. It had been alone, possibly for days, with no one to care for it. The more he thought about it, the more frustrated he became. How could anyone do this to such an innocent creature? His determination grew stronger. He wasn't going to let this puppy's story end like this. He had no idea where he would find help, but he knew he had to keep moving. Jack's mind shifted to the base. It was still miles away, and it would take a while to get there. But every step he took felt like progress, and with the puppy still clinging to life in his arms, Jack wouldn't stop until he found a way to save it. The forest seemed to close in around him as the darkness deepened, but Jack's focus never wavered. He had a job to do, and nothing was going to distract him from it. As he moved through the woods, he could feel the cold creeping into his bones, but he pressed on, his only thought being the puppy. The sound of the wind grew louder, the leaves rustling like whispers in the night. Jack's breath became more steady as he adjusted his grip on the puppy, ensuring that it was safe and secure. Every so often, he glanced down, making sure that the tiny creature was still breathing. The faintest movement was enough to keep him going. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Jack saw a faint light in the distance. It was the glow of a small cabin, nestled among the trees. A sense of relief washed over him as he realized that he was close to help. He pushed forward with renewed energy, his heart racing in anticipation. As he approached the cabin, Jack's mind flooded with questions. Would the people inside be able to help? Would they have the resources to save the puppy? He didn't know, but he knew he had to try. With every step, he was getting closer to the hope that he so desperately needed. As Jack approached the small cabin, the faint light growing brighter with every step, his heart began to race. He could hear the faint whimper of the puppy in his arms, its breathing still shallow but steady, a small sign of life. The door of the cabin opened just as Jack reached the steps. A woman stood in the doorway, her face soft with concern as she saw the Marine carrying the trembling puppy. "What happened?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he spoke, his voice hoarse. "I found this little guy on the trail. He was abandoned, left to die out there. I think he's barely hanging on." The woman didn't hesitate. "Bring him in," she said urgently, stepping aside. Jack walked into the warm cabin, the heat from the fireplace immediately easing the chill in his bones. He gently laid the puppy on the soft rug near the fire, his hands shaking slightly as he checked the little creature for any signs of further injury. The woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, quickly got to work. She grabbed a towel and began to dry the puppy, her movements swift and practiced. "He's cold, but I think he's going to make it," Sarah murmured, her hands gentle as she worked. Jack watched, his mind still racing. He had never felt so helpless, but now, seeing the puppy in Sarah's capable hands, he felt a glimmer of hope. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the cabin with warmth and light as Sarah continued to tend to the puppy. After what felt like an eternity, the puppy's eyes fluttered open. Jack let out a quiet sigh of relief. The puppy was weak, but it was alive. Sarah smiled at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "He's a fighter," she said. Jack nodded, still in disbelief at the turn of events. "I didn't think he'd make it this far," he said softly. "I didn't know if I could save him." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saved him by bringing him here. That's all anyone can do." Jack looked down at the puppy, who was now nuzzling into the towel, seeking warmth. "I didn't know what I was going to do out there," Jack admitted, his voice low. "But I couldn't just leave him. He needed help. And you gave it to him," Sarah said gently. Jack nodded again, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he had done something good. The puppy, now wrapped in the warmth of the cabin, began to relax, its breathing becoming more steady. Jack sat down on the floor next to it, watching as Sarah worked, both of them silently understanding the bond that had already formed between the Marine and the small animal. The hours passed quietly as the puppy grew stronger with each passing minute. The room was filled with a peaceful stillness, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional soft sound from the puppy. Jack's thoughts drifted to his time in the military, to the countless missions and battles, but in this moment, all that mattered was the tiny creature in front of him. He had saved this life, and in doing so, he had found a new purpose, a new reason to keep moving forward. As the night deepened and the fire slowly burned low, Jack leaned back against the wall, exhausted but content. The puppy, now calm and resting peacefully, had found a second chance at life. And so had Jack. He had walked into the forest that afternoon with only the desire to help. And in return, he had found a companion who would stand by him, no questions asked. The bond between a Marine and his dog, forged in loyalty and trust, was a bond that could never be broken. Days passed, and the little puppy, now named Max, continued to grow stronger in the warmth of the cabin. Jack had settled into a quiet routine at Sarah's home, staying to care for the puppy and recover from his unexpected journey. The bond between him and Max grew each day, the tiny German shepherd showing more signs of vitality with each passing hour. Max had become more than just a rescued animal. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a chance for a new beginning. Jack found himself smiling more, something he hadn't done in a long while. There was something comforting about Max's presence. The puppy's big, amber eyes were full of trust, and every wag of his tail filled the room with warmth. Jack had spent years serving in places where hope was often in short supply, but now, as he watched Max explore the cabin with innocent curiosity, it felt like a reminder that life could still surprise him. The puppy's resilience, after all he had been through, was inspiring. One morning, as Jack was tending to Max, he heard a soft knock at the door. Sarah opened it to reveal a man in a military uniform, his expression warm but serious. "Sergeant Thompson, I thought I'd find you here," the man said, stepping inside. "We were all worried when you went off the trail. It's good to see you're both okay." Jack stood up, surprised by the visit. The man was Captain Richard Hayes, Jack's commanding officer. He had heard about Jack's unexpected detour during his patrol and came to check on him. "I didn't expect to see you out here, sir," Jack said, his voice a little rough from the days of isolation. Captain Hayes smiled, glancing at Max, who was now wagging his tail enthusiastically. "It looks like you found yourself some company," Hayes said with a chuckle. Jack nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "Yeah, he's been through a lot. I couldn't just leave him out there." "I understand," Hayes said, his tone turning more serious. "But we need you back, Jack. The unit's been short on hands, and we've got a mission coming up." Jack paused, looking down at Max, who was now playfully tugging at the hem of his jacket. "I know," he said quietly, "but I don't know if I'm ready to go back just yet. It feels different now, having him here." Captain Hayes studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You've earned some time to heal, Jack. But remember, the mission is always there. The Marine Corps doesn't stop just because you need a break. And neither does the work you do for them." Jack looked at Max once more, then nodded slowly. "I'll be ready. I'll take care of him first." Then, I'll be back. The captain gave him a pat on the shoulder. Take the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready. After Captain Hayes left, Jack sat in the quiet of the cabin, his thoughts swirling. The decision to return to duty weighed on him, but he also knew that Max had become a crucial part of his life. The small puppy, once abandoned and forgotten, had brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but the bond they shared now was unbreakable. Max had given him a reason to move forward, to find hope once again in a world that often felt dark. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Jack sat on the porch, Max curled up beside him, both of them watching the last light of the day fade into night. The future seemed uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt ready to face it. He wasn't alone anymore. The next few days were a blur for Jack. His time was spent mostly with Max, the puppy who had become more than just a companion. He had become Jack's anchor, his reason to keep going. Each morning, Jack would wake to the sound of Max's soft whines, the puppy eager to start the day. They spent hours outside, Jack walking the trail with Max by his side, a small, loyal shadow. There was a peace that Jack hadn't known in years. His mind, which had been consumed with the noise and chaos of his military life, was now focused on something simpler, something pure. The bond between him and Max grew stronger with every passing day. Jack knew it wouldn't last forever, though. His duty was still waiting for him, and the mission was not something he could ignore. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch, Max curled up beside him, Jack's phone rang. The screen flashed with Captain Hayes' name, and Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew this call was coming. "Sergeant Thompson," Captain Hayes' voice came through, calm but firm. "We need you back at base. The mission is set to go in the next 48 hours. It's time." Jack took a deep breath, looking down at Max. "I know," he said quietly, the weight of the decision heavy in his chest. "I'll be there." "Good. You've earned your time, Jack, but we need you now," Captain Hayes replied. The line went silent for a moment, and then Hayes added, "And bring that dog with you." Jack smiled at the thought of Max accompanying him on the mission. The bond between them had become inseparable. "I'll bring him," Jack said, his voice steady. "He's ready." After hanging up, Jack sat still for a moment, staring out at the forest. The decision had been made. He was going back, but this time, it would be different. He would have Max by his side. As the sun set that evening, Jack prepared for the journey ahead. The pack was already ready, his gear packed and waiting by the door. Max was excited, wagging his tail as he bounded around Jack's legs. "You ready, buddy?" Jack asked, bending down to pet Max. The puppy barked in response, as if to say he was more than ready. The next morning, they set off, leaving Sarah's cabin behind. The drive to the base was long, but Jack didn't mind. Max sat calmly in the front seat beside him, his head resting against the window, ears perked. It was a peaceful drive, the kind of quiet Jack hadn't experienced in years. As they approached the base, Jack's thoughts shifted. He knew what he was heading into. The mission would be challenging, but having Max with him gave him a renewed sense of strength. When they arrived at the base, Captain Hayes was waiting for them. "Glad to see you made it, Sergeant," he said with a nod, his eyes flicking to Max. "Looks like you've got a good partner there." Jack smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "He's more than just a partner," Jack replied. "He's family." Hayes nodded. "Good to hear. You're going to need that kind of loyalty on this mission." Jack and Max were quickly integrated back into the unit. The team had heard about Jack's time with the puppy, and they welcomed him back with open arms. It wasn't long before Jack realized that Max had become more than just a companion for him. The bond between the two of them had a ripple effect on the entire unit. The Marines were inspired by Jack's commitment to his new partner, and Max's presence brought a sense of calm to everyone around him. As they prepared for the mission, Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had something to protect, something to fight for. Max had not only saved him in the forest but had also given him a renewed sense of purpose. As they gathered their gear and prepared to head out, Jack gave Max one last pat on the head. "Let's do this, buddy," he said softly. Max's tail wagged, his eyes full of determination. Jack knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The mission had begun, and Jack found himself moving with the team through the dense forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the crunch of boots on the ground and the occasional command from their captain. Max, as always, was by Jack's side, his tail wagging as he trotted along, eager for the next step. Jack had never been one for speeches, but as he looked at his fellow Marines, he could sense the unspoken bond between them. The quiet understanding that they were all here for the same purpose, each other, and the mission. But there was something different this time. With Max by his side, Jack felt a deeper connection to his unit, a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. As they continued through the forest, Jack's mind kept drifting back to the days he had spent with Max in Sarah's cabin. The puppy had been his anchor, the reminder that not everything was about the battles he had fought or the scars he carried. It was about something simpler, something pure. When they reached their destination, the team set up camp for the night. Jack and Max found a quiet spot near the edge of the camp, away from the rest of the Marines. Jack sat down, his back against a tree, and Max curled up beside him. The fire crackled in the distance, but Jack was lost in thought, his mind replaying the events of the past few weeks. He had never expected his life to take this turn, never imagined that a small, abandoned puppy would change everything. He had been so focused on the missions, the responsibilities, the weight of being a Marine, that he had forgotten what it was like to just be. Max had reminded him of that. As the night grew darker and the stars began to shine above, Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Max was still there, by his side, offering him the silent comfort only a dog could give. "You're something else, buddy," Jack whispered softly, reaching down to pet Max. The puppy's eyes looked up at him, filled with unwavering trust. The firelight flickered, casting a warm glow across the camp, but Jack knew the true warmth was beside him. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Max. The bond they shared was unspoken, but it was stronger than anything Jack had ever known. As the fire crackled and the Marines settled into their makeshift beds, Jack closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it. With Max at his side, he could handle whatever came next. The next morning, they packed up camp and resumed their mission. The team moved with precision, navigating the terrain like they had done countless times before. But this time, something was different. Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. His steps were lighter, his resolve stronger. Max, trotting beside him, was more than just a dog now. He was part of the team. They worked together seamlessly, Jack and Max, as if they had been doing this for years. Through the thick brush and over the rough terrain, they moved as one. Jack knew that no matter what the mission required, he had something he hadn't had before, a partner who would never leave his side. The day passed quickly, and as the sun began to set, they made their way back to the safety of their camp. Jack sat down, Max immediately curling up beside him, his body warm against Jack's legs. As they both looked up at the stars, Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude. Max had saved him, not just from the wilderness, but from the darkness he had carried inside himself for so long. They were a team now, and nothing could break the bond they had formed. The mission had taken a new turn. Jack and Max, now inseparable, had grown accustomed to their daily routine in the field. The rest of the team had come to respect the bond between the Marine and his dog, and Max's presence brought a sense of calm that was both rare and invaluable in their line of work. As the days passed, Jack began to feel more and more like the man he used to be. The weight of the past, the countless battles and losses, was still there, but with Max by his side, it felt more manageable. One afternoon, as they navigated a particularly dense stretch of forest, the team came to a stop. Captain Hayes, who had been leading them, raised a hand to signal for silence. Jack, always alert, immediately knew something was off. The air felt different, thicker, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Max, ever the sentry, immediately sat down, his ears perked, his body tense. Jack instinctively reached down to pat him, a silent reassurance. "What's going on?" Jack whispered to Hayes. "We're not sure," Hayes replied, his voice low. "Something doesn't feel right. Stay alert." The Marines spread out, forming a loose perimeter, while Jack and Max remained at the center. Every sound in the forest now felt amplified, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the soft crunch of boots on the forest floor. Time seemed to stretch as they waited. Max, though normally calm, was on edge, his amber eyes scanning the shadows. Jack's hand tightened around the rifle in his grip, his instincts telling him that something was coming. Then, without warning, the stillness was broken by a sudden movement in the brush. Max's ears shot up, and he let out a low growl, his body coiling with tension. Jack's heart raced as he looked to Hayes for guidance. "Stay low," Hayes ordered, and the team immediately dropped to their knees, blending into the underbrush. Jack's eyes never left Max, who remained perfectly still, his gaze locked on the movement in the trees ahead. The sound grew louder, and for a moment, Jack's mind flashed back to countless encounters, moments when danger had struck without warning. But this time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had Max. The dog's growl deepened, his body vibrating with the tension of the moment. Jack slowly raised his rifle, his breath steady despite the surge of adrenaline. The team was ready, but Jack knew they were only as strong as their bond. As the figure emerged from the trees, Jack's first instinct was to move, to protect, but Max beat him to it. With a sudden burst of speed, the German shepherd lunged forward, his teeth bared, his growl now a full snarl. The figure, a man dressed in dark clothing, froze, clearly startled by the dog's sudden aggression. Jack sprang into action, rushing forward to intervene before Max could cause any harm. "Easy, boy," Jack called out, his voice calm but firm. Max hesitated for a moment, then stopped, his body still tense but listening to Jack's command. The man, clearly relieved, took a step back. "I didn't mean any harm," the man said, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. Jack lowered his rifle, his eyes never leaving the stranger. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice steady. "Just passing through," the man replied, his voice cautious. "I didn't know there was a patrol in this area." Jack's instincts were still on high alert, but he knew better than to jump to conclusions. "You're lucky," Jack said, his voice low. "This is military territory. You can't just wander in here without a reason." The man nodded quickly, still looking nervous. "I'm sorry. I'll leave now." Jack didn't trust him entirely, but there was something in the man's eyes that told him he wasn't a threat, at least, not right now. "You better," Jack said, his voice firm. "Stay out of our way." As the man quickly retreated into the forest, Jack stood still, his senses heightened. Max, ever watchful, kept his eyes on the man until he was out of sight. Jack looked down at the dog, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Good boy," Jack murmured, giving Max a quick pat. The bond they shared was undeniable. In that moment, Jack realized that Max wasn't just a companion. He was a protector, a partner, and a friend who had saved his life more times than he could count. With Max by his side, Jack knew he could face whatever came next, knowing they had each other's backs. The days grew longer as Jack and Max continued their mission, moving through the dense forest with the team. The presence of the other Marines felt almost secondary to the bond Jack shared with his loyal companion. Max was always by his side, providing a steady comfort in a world that was often unpredictable. The team had encountered a few minor obstacles in their way, but nothing that could shake the resolve of Jack or his dog. The real test was coming, and Jack could feel it in the air. The tension that had been building in the forest was palpable. The trees stood tall and silent, casting long shadows over the trail, and the sounds of nature seemed to hold their breath as the team made their way deeper into the heart of the mission. It was on the fourth night when the unease reached its peak. They had set up camp in a small clearing near a stream, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. Jack sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker, Max curled up at his feet. He ran his hand through the dog's fur, the warmth grounding him, bringing him back to the present. His thoughts were still heavy with the conversation he had had with Captain Hayes earlier in the day. The mission was about to take a critical turn, and Jack knew that the next steps would require all of his focus. He couldn't afford distractions. But as he looked down at Max, who had settled beside him with a soft sigh, Jack realized that the puppy had become his rock. Max wasn't just a companion anymore, he was a symbol of everything Jack had been fighting for. The bond they shared was something Jack never expected, but it was exactly what he needed. Just as Jack was about to lose himself in his thoughts, a soft rustle in the bushes caught his attention. His hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his hip, but Max was already on alert. The dog's ears perked up, his head tilting slightly toward the noise, his body tensed. Jack didn't move immediately, watching for any further signs of movement. The other Marines were on edge as well, their hands on their weapons, eyes scanning the shadows. "It's probably nothing," Sergeant Harris muttered, but Jack wasn't so sure. Max's instinct was rarely wrong. The rustling grew louder, followed by a faint crunch of footsteps. Then, out of the shadows, a figure appeared, one Jack recognized. It was Captain Hayes. Jack immediately relaxed, but Max, ever vigilant, let out a low growl. "Easy, Max," Jack murmured, but Hayes raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "It's me, Jack," Hayes said softly, stepping closer to the fire. "We need to talk." Jack nodded, a sense of unease washing over him. "What's going on, sir?" Hayes knelt beside him, his face serious. "We've got intel that there's a larger force in the area. We might be walking into something much bigger than we anticipated." Jack's heart rate picked up, the weight of the news sinking in. Max, sensing his tension, stood up and moved closer to Jack, his presence calming but alert. "What's the plan?" Jack asked, his voice steady but carrying the gravity of the situation. Hayes met his eyes. "We move out first thing in the morning. We're going to need all the support we can get. It's going to get dangerous, Jack. Are you ready for this?" Jack glanced down at Max, whose eyes were locked on him, as if waiting for his next move. Jack took a deep breath. "I'm ready." Hayes nodded, satisfied with his answer. "We'll stick together, then. Get some rest. It's going to be a long day tomorrow." As the fire crackled and the rest of the team settled down for the night, Jack remained awake, staring into the flames. His mind raced with the possibility of what lay ahead. He knew the mission wasn't over yet, and the real challenges were only just beginning. But with Max by his side, Jack felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning came quickly, and the team was already moving. Jack stood beside his pack, looking over the map one last time before they set out. Max, as always, was right at his side, alert and ready. The tension in the air was palpable. The mission had just shifted into a new gear, and Jack knew there was no turning back. As they moved out, Jack's mind kept returning to the conversation with Captain Hayes the night before. The reality of what was ahead was starting to sink in, but the presence of Max beside him kept his nerves in check. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Only a few weeks ago, Jack had been at his lowest point, lost and drifting. Now, with Max at his side, he felt grounded in a way he hadn't in years. The team moved silently through the forest, the soft rustling of leaves the only sound. Jack's eyes were constantly scanning their surroundings, his senses heightened. Every step felt heavier as the realization of the danger ahead grew clearer. They had to move quickly, and they had to be careful. Max, as always, was a step ahead, his nose twitching as he picked up on every scent. Jack trusted the dog's instincts implicitly. They had faced danger together before, and Max had never led him astray. The hours stretched on, the forest seeming to close in around them. The further they went, the more Jack felt the weight of their mission pressing down on him. Every creak of a branch, every whisper of wind, felt like a potential threat. As the day wore on, the team reached the edge of the forest. In the distance, Jack could see the faint outline of their objective. It was a small compound, barely visible from the trees, but Jack could feel the tension building. They had reached the final stretch. Captain Hayes turned to the team, his voice low but firm. "We stick together," he said. "Stay sharp. We don't know what's waiting for us." The team nodded, their expressions hardening. Jack's eyes met Hayes for a brief moment, and in that silent exchange, Jack knew that the stakes had never been higher. The compound was ahead, but the path wasn't clear. They would have to approach cautiously, and Jack knew that any mistake could be costly. They moved forward, their steps synchronized, the air thick with anticipation. Max was once again by Jack's side, moving with quiet precision. The bond between them had grown stronger, more intuitive. Jack's hand brushed against Max's fur as they moved, a small gesture of reassurance in the midst of the uncertainty. The closer they got to the compound, the more Jack's senses were on high alert. His breathing was steady, but his mind was racing. What would they find when they reached the compound? Were they walking into a trap? He couldn't afford to let his guard down now. Max, sensing his unease, glanced up at him, offering a silent promise of loyalty. The Marines continued their steady approach, Jack and Max leading the way. Every second felt like an eternity. As they reached the outskirts of the compound, Jack motioned for the team to stop. He knelt down, his eyes scanning the area. The tension was almost unbearable now. This was it. Everything they had been preparing for had led to this moment. Jack's mind was clear. He had come this far, and with Max by his side, he knew they would face whatever came next, together. The air was thick with tension as Jack crouched behind a large boulder, his eyes focused on the compound ahead. The Marines had all gathered, each of them crouched low, waiting for the next move. Max, as always, sat silently by Jack's side, his amber eyes fixed on the target with unwavering focus. Jack's heart beat steadily in his chest, his breathing calm despite the weight of the situation. He knew what was at stake. This was the moment they had been preparing for, and every instinct in him told him they had to get this right. Captain Hayes moved quietly to Jack's side, his face serious. "We're going in," Hayes whispered. "Stay close, move fast. We stick together, no exceptions." Jack nodded, his grip on his rifle tightening as he looked at Max. The bond between them was undeniable. It had only been a few weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. Max had become more than just a companion, he was part of the team, a silent protector in the face of uncertainty. As they began to move, Jack's senses were on high alert. Every crackling twig, every rustling leaf, made his muscles tense. The team was moving with precision, their movements silent and synchronized. Jack felt a sense of unity with them, but his focus remained on the task ahead. They reached the edge of the compound, and Jack motioned for the team to spread out. The air was thick with the scent of moss and wet earth. The forest surrounding them like a silent witness to their every move. Jack looked down at Max once more. The puppy was focused, his body poised and ready to move at a moment's notice. Jack could feel Max's energy, his instincts mirroring his own. They were a team in every sense of the word. As they approached the entrance to the compound, Jack's mind raced. What were they walking into? What kind of danger awaited them on the other side? He couldn't let his guard down. He had to stay sharp. The Marines, now just yards away from the entrance, paused. Jack's eyes scanned the area. The compound appeared deserted, the buildings silent, windows dark. There was an eerie calm to the place, one that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand up. Hayes signaled for them to move in, and with a single nod from Jack, they began their advance. They moved quickly, staying low, their shadows blending with the trees around them. Jack's heartbeat quickened as they neared the entrance, and he could feel Max's anticipation beside him. The compound was just ahead now, the entrance looming in front of them. Jack signaled for the team to stop. They were in position. Hayes motioned for Jack to move forward, and without hesitation, Jack took the first step. As he neared the door, the quiet stillness of the compound seemed almost unnatural. He reached for the door handle, pausing for just a second. Every muscle in his body was tense, every sense alert. Jack turned the handle and pushed the door open slowly, the creaking sound echoing in the silence. The inside of the compound was dark, the air thick with dust and age. But there was something else, something unsettling. A faint smell lingered in the air, and Jack's instincts screamed that something was wrong. He signaled for the team to enter. Max followed close behind, his eyes darting from corner to corner, his ears perked. Jack stepped into the room, his senses on high alert. The room was empty, save for a few scattered boxes and broken furniture. But as he took a few more steps, he heard it, a faint sound, like a soft shuffle. His heart skipped a beat. Was someone else inside? Jack's eyes narrowed as he listened intently. Max, sensing his tension, let out a low growl. Jack's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, and he motioned for the team to fan out. The room was quiet again, but Jack's instincts told him that they weren't alone. He could feel the presence of something, or someone, waiting just out of sight. Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to be ready. Whatever was coming next, they would face it together. The silence in the compound was deafening as Jack and his team advanced further into the dimly lit room. Max stayed close by Jack's side, his ears perked, his body tense with anticipation. The faint shuffle they had heard earlier still echoed in Jack's mind. He scanned the room again, his senses on high alert, as his fellow Marines moved cautiously around him. Every corner, every shadow felt like a potential threat. The stillness of the room seemed almost unnatural. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the walls. Jack's instincts told him they were walking into something more dangerous than they had prepared for. He motioned for the team to spread out, and they began their search of the room, each Marine moving with precision and care. Max, as always, was Jack's silent partner, his watchful eyes darting around the space as if sensing the same unease. The tension was palpable. They moved slowly, methodically, checking every corner, every crevice. Jack could feel the pressure building, the anticipation growing with each passing second. They had been in hostile situations before, but this felt different. The quiet was unnerving. Then, suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence, a rustling noise coming from the far side of the room. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Jack's trained ears caught it immediately. His hand instinctively went to his sidearm as he motioned for the team to freeze. Max's low growl filled the room, a warning that something was amiss. The rest of the team froze, weapons raised, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Jack's heart raced as he focused on the sound, trying to pinpoint its source. The rustling continued, but it was closer now. There was no mistaking it. Something, or someone, was in the room with them. Jack's mind raced, running through the possibilities. Was it an enemy soldier? A civilian? Whatever it was, Jack knew they had to be prepared for anything. He motioned for the team to move to the left side of the room, hoping to flank the source of the sound. His body was coiled with tension, ready to react at a moment's notice. Max's growl grew louder as the sound came closer. Jack's grip on his weapon tightened. As they advanced, the sound grew more distinct, now clearly footsteps shuffling across the floor. The room was so quiet that Jack could almost hear his own heartbeat, but he stayed focused, keeping his eyes locked on the dark corners of the room. Then, without warning, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was a man, dressed in a torn jacket, his face pale and gaunt, eyes wide with fear. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please," the man said, his voice shaky. "I mean no harm." Jack's team held their position, but Jack couldn't help but take a step forward. His instincts told him the man was not a threat, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice steady but cautious. The man looked down at the floor, then back up at Jack. "I was left here," he said quietly. "I'm not with anyone. They abandoned me." Jack studied the man for a moment, weighing the situation. His team was on edge, but he could tell the man was no immediate threat. He lowered his weapon slightly but kept it within reach. "What happened here?" Jack asked, his voice firm. The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "I don't know. They brought me in for questioning, and then they left. I've been here for days." Jack exchanged a look with Captain Hayes, who stepped forward. "We need to get you out of here," Hayes said. "But we need information. Who brought you here? Why?" The man hesitated before answering. "It was a small group. I think they were trying to find something, but I don't know what. They weren't the ones who left me. I think they were just following orders." Jack's mind raced as he processed the man's words. This was not what they had expected. The situation had just become more complicated. "We'll get you to safety," Jack said, his tone resolute. "But we need to move quickly." The man nodded gratefully, and Jack motioned for his team to prepare to leave the compound. The uncertainty of the situation still loomed over them, but with Max by his side, Jack knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The bond between them had never felt stronger. As they moved toward the exit, Jack couldn't help but wonder what other surprises lay ahead. The mission had shifted again, and now they had more questions than answers. The team moved quickly, with Jack keeping a sharp eye on the man who had been abandoned in the compound. They had made their way to the edge of the forest where they would meet up with the extraction team. Max, as always, stayed close by Jack's side, his watchful eyes scanning the surroundings. The man walked beside them, his gaunt frame showing the toll of days spent in the compound. Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him, but he knew they had to focus on the mission. The air was crisp as they moved through the dense trees, the quiet broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath their boots and the occasional command exchanged between the team. Jack's mind was racing. The man's words had raised more questions than answers. What had really been going on in that compound? Why had they been left behind? The team's mission had always been clear, to secure the area, gather intel, and ensure the safety of the region, but now it seemed like there was more at play. Jack's thoughts drifted to Max. The bond between them had become unshakable, forged in the heat of battle and the quiet moments of the journey. Every step they took, every decision, was made together. The presence of Max beside him was a constant reassurance. As they reached the edge of the forest, Jack noticed the distant lights of the extraction team's vehicles. They had made it. They would get the man to safety, regroup, and figure out their next move. Captain Hayes signaled to the team to pick up the pace. "We're almost there," Hayes said, his voice steady. "Keep your eyes open." Jack nodded, still processing everything that had happened. They had just reached the clearing when the first of the extraction team's vehicles pulled up. Jack moved toward the vehicle, guiding the man along with him. The extraction team leader, a tall, sharp-eyed woman named Lieutenant Davis, stepped out of the vehicle to meet them. "What's the status?" she asked, her gaze quickly moving from Jack to the man walking beside him. "We've got a survivor," Jack said, glancing at the man. "He's been in there for days. We need to get him medical attention and figure out what happened at the compound. Davis nodded. We'll take him from here. You and your team did good. Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders as the extraction team took over. The man was quickly escorted into the vehicle, and Jack's team moved to the other side to prepare for the return trip. Max trotted alongside Jack, his tail wagging as if to signal that they had completed yet another mission together. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. Despite the uncertainty of what was ahead, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The mission wasn't over yet, but they had made it through another phase. As the extraction vehicle pulled away, Jack and his team began their journey back to base. The forest seemed quieter now, the weight of the unknown still hanging in the air, but Jack felt more certain than ever that he wasn't alone. Max was at his side, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. The bond between them was stronger than ever, a silent promise of loyalty and courage that Jack knew would see them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The ride back to base was quiet, the weight of the mission still hanging in the air. Jack sat in the back of the transport vehicle, Max at his side, his faithful companion as always. The world outside was a blur of trees and dirt roads, the hum of the engine the only sound that filled the space. Jack leaned back, his mind racing, but his body was exhausted. The mission had been far from simple. They had found a survivor, uncovered more questions than answers, and yet the feeling of unfinished business still lingered. Jack couldn't shake the thought of the compound and the man they had rescued. Who had left him there? What had been the true purpose of the mission? There were still so many unanswered questions, but the priority now was getting back to base and ensuring the safety of everyone involved. The team was weary but relieved, their pace slowing as the vehicle approached the familiar sight of the base. Jack could feel the tension in the air begin to dissipate as they neared their destination. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in days, he felt like they had made it through the hardest part. As the vehicle came to a stop, Jack's gaze shifted to Max, who was curled up at his feet, his eyes closed but alert. The bond between them had grown stronger throughout the mission. It was more than just a partnership now. It was a connection built on trust, survival, and shared purpose. Jack had relied on Max in ways he never thought possible. The puppy had been a constant source of comfort and strength, and in return, Jack had been the protector Max needed. The team began to disembark, and Jack followed, making sure Max was right by his side. The base was bustling with activity, but Jack couldn't shake the sense of unease that lingered. They had completed their mission, but the unknown still weighed heavily on his mind. He glanced down at Max, who was trotting along beside him, his head held high. "We're home, buddy," Jack muttered under his breath. Max looked up at him, his tail wagging in response, as if to reassure Jack that they had made it through this chapter, together. As they entered the debriefing room, the familiar faces of his fellow Marines were waiting. There was a sense of camaraderie in the air, but also a quiet seriousness. Captain Hayes stepped forward, giving Jack a nod of approval. "Well done, Sergeant," Hayes said, his voice firm. "You and your team handled yourselves well. But this isn't over yet. We need to figure out who's behind all this." Jack nodded, his mind still preoccupied with the events of the past few days. "I know, sir. I don't have all the answers yet." Hayes studied him for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "None of us do, Jack. But we'll get there. One step at a time." Jack gave a small nod, his eyes shifting to Max, who was sitting patiently by his side. He had come so far, and yet there was still more to be done. The road ahead would be difficult, but Jack knew that with Max at his side, they could face whatever came next. The bond they shared was unbreakable, a partnership forged in the toughest of circumstances. And with that thought, Jack felt a sense of peace. No matter what the future held, they would face it together.